Hi, my name's Noreen. I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding, not properly anyway. They sent a screenshot, no name, no greeting, just a time, a place, and the assumption I'd know my place. They used my money, my silence, and my absence to make everything look perfect. But what happens when the quiet one finally speaks? And what kind of mother lets her grandchild be erased, right in front of her? Would you still call that family? There was no gold foil, no monogrammed initials, no pale blue envelope like the ones my mother used to insist on for family events. We do things properly, she always said. This time, there was just a text message, a screenshot. Thought you already got this, Jess had added, as if that would soften the sting. It didn't. The screen glowed in my hand, the words sharp in their casual cruelty. Darlene plus Harlan. Together forever, June 5th. Please RSVP by May 10th. No greeting, no "Hi, Noreen," no note asking if I could bring Livia. Just a date, a time, and the assumption that I'd know my place without being told. I stared at it for longer than I should have. My coffee had gone cold before I even realized I hadn't taken a sip. Truth is, this wasn't new. When you've lived your whole life in the background, you learn to read between the silences. There were no family photos on my mother's mantle that included me past the age of 10. When Darlene got her driver's license, she got a used Honda. When I did, I got a bus pass and a warning not to be reckless like your father. They never had to say it out loud. I knew what role I played. Not the rebel, not the favorite, not even the failure, just the placeholder. The one they counted on to disappear quietly when attention turned elsewhere. That night, after tucking Livia into bed and pretending I didn't notice she hadn't said anything about the wedding invite sitting on the counter, I called Jess back. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey girl, you saw it?" I tried to keep my tone light. "Yeah, thanks for forwarding it." A pause. Then, "Wait, so, you didn't get one, like in the mail?" "Nope." "That's weird. Darlene said everyone was accounted for." I let out a breath, small and sharp. Maybe I was just the plus one to my own silence. Jess didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I. It wasn't her fault. Jess had always tried to bridge the gap between me and the rest of the family, like patching a hole in a boat that was already halfway underwater. She meant well, but even well-meaning people sometimes hand you reminders of how invisible you really are. Later, I found Livia in her room, coloring on the floor with the quiet intensity she always had when something bothered her, but she didn't know how to say it. "Did Aunt Darlene send me an invite too?" she asked, without looking up. I sat beside her, my knees cracking the way they always did. "No, sweetheart, just the one." Her pencil stopped moving. "Oh." She didn't pout or cry, just absorbed it the way kids do, like water soaking into a towel. No mess, just wait. I reached over and tucked her hair behind her ear, the way my mother never did for me. "Sometimes," I said gently, "grown-ups forget who's really part of the family." She nodded, then added a little sun in the corner of her drawing. Later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the message again, the light from the fridge humming beside me. The words hadn't changed, but something in me had. No name, no greeting, just a date, a time, and the assumption I'd fall in line. I showed up with a spreadsheet, not an attitude. That was my quiet promise to myself as I pressed the speakerphone button, and Verna's clipped voice echoed through the room. "You're good with lists," she said. "Can you just handle the RSVPs and make sure the caterer confirms? It's all just too much for Darlene right now." Not once did she say thank you. Not once did she ask if I had time. Because in our family, my time didn't belong to me. It belonged to whoever was in crisis. And Darlene's wedding had become a full-blown event-level crisis, apparently. I pulled out my notepad and pen from the kitchen drawer. "Sure," I said. "Just send me what you've got." A pause. "I'll have Darlene forward the vendor list, but the florist is being difficult. She's not responding quickly." Give me her name, I replied. I'll call her directly. That's how I ended up redoing the seating chart, catching 5 name typos the calligrapher had missed, and adjusting the layout for the rehearsal dinner because Darlene thought the original design felt too cafeteria-like. And that's also how I ended up listening to my sister on speakerphone gush to her designer about the color palette she'd decided on all by herself. Muted blues and soft ivory tones that, ironically, I'd pitched during a late-night phone call while she was too exhausted to care about napkin shades. It's classic elegance, she said. Totally me. I muted myself and stared at the wall. It wasn't the first time she'd taken credit for my suggestions. Probably wouldn't be the last. But this time, something lodged deeper than usual. I didn't say anything. I just made the corrections, sent the new files, and watched the clock inch toward midnight. 2 days before the rehearsal, a box arrived. Livia was the one who brought it in from the porch. Is this your dress? I nodded. I think so. We opened it together at the dining table, the late afternoon sun slipping across the wood. Inside was a garment bag labeled with my name. I unzipped it slowly, already uneasy without knowing why. The dress inside was mauve, a tired, dusty mauve that looked like it belonged on a faded church pew cushion or the curtains in a motel lobby. Certainly not the cream-toned tea-length dress I'd agreed on with the planner weeks ago. I sent a quick text to the number I'd been given for fittings. Wrong color? I was supposed to have ivory. The reply came 5 minutes later. Color change, bride's final call. No greeting, no explanation, just a brush-off in text form. I didn't call Darlene. I didn't send a passive-aggressive email. I just stood there for a long time, holding the dress up against the light. Muted mauve. It didn't clash. It didn't shine. It didn't speak. It just blended in, just like me. I thought of a school play I helped build the set for back in high school. I'd stayed late for a week, hammering wood and painting backdrops, only to open the program on opening night and find my name missing. The drama teacher had shrugged and said, "We can't fit everyone in." It's fine, I said then. It wasn't fine, and this dress wasn't either. Later that evening, after cleaning up dinner and getting Livia ready for bed, she wandered into my room while I was steaming the hem. "That's the dress?" she asked, frowning. She cocked her head. "Looks like Grandma's carpet." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was dead on. "Maybe that's the vibe," I said. She blinked, still staring. "It's not really you." "No," I admitted, "but I guess it helps if I don't stand out too much." She sat on the edge of my bed. "Why not?" I looked at her small, freckled face, at how she was still trying to understand this family that always seemed to operate by unwritten rules. Because some people get scared when someone else shows up bright. Livia didn't answer. She just nodded like she was filing it away, then slipped off to her room. I hung the dress by the window and pulled the blinds halfway closed. The setting sun cast my reflection onto the glass, washing me out until I looked like a silhouette fading into the shadows behind me. The next morning, I was folding towels when the phone rang. The old landline, not my cell. That phone only rang when it was someone from the family. I stared at the caller ID. Verna. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "Noreen," she said sharply, skipping any kind of greeting. "Can I trust you not to ruin this?" I didn't answer right away. She wasn't asking. She was declaring. "You know how fragile Darlene's been. Planning this has been emotional for her." Of course. Darlene was the fragile one. Not the one who got her dress switched. Not the one erased from photos. Not the one walking on eggshells since childhood. "It's her day," Verna continued, her voice calm but tight, the kind of calm that meant danger. "You understand. You've had your own life." My stomach tensed, but I kept my voice even. "What is it you need, Mom?" She sighed like the burden of needing my help again was just too much. "Just don't bring that pity energy, okay? I need you to dress appropriately, nothing loud. Keep your makeup simple. Don't make a statement. The focus should be on the bride. I leaned against the counter, gripping the towel tighter than I meant to. I hadn't planned on making a speech, if that's what you're worried about. She let out a small laugh, short and mean. Good. We've worked too hard to make this wedding feel respectable. Respectable. I stared at the fridge, at the post-it note Livia had left that said, "Don't forget, pick up snacks for movie night." I wanted to tell Verna that I didn't owe her or her version of respect, that I'd earned my own, quietly, but I knew better than to waste breath where it wasn't heard. "I'll be there," I said, "and I'll keep things easy." Good girl. She hung up before I could say another word. Later, while making lunch, my mind wandered back to a moment when I was 12. School recital. I was in the background, second row, the girl in navy tights and scuffed shoes. I had practiced for weeks, choreographed my steps just right. I remember asking Verna that morning if she'd come early. She did. Not to see me warm up, but to talk to another mom about Darlene's science fair win. That afternoon, backstage, I reached for lip gloss and dabbed just a little on. Verna caught me. "Don't overdo it," she snapped. "Darlene's watching. They won't remember your moves, just your mistakes." I wiped it off. I still remember the stinging in my eyes more than the stage lights. Now, all these years later, the script hadn't changed. I was still being told to dim myself so Darlene could shine brighter. By early evening, I was upstairs checking over a revised catering list when Livia patted in, barefoot and curious. "Why did Grandma say you shouldn't wear color?" she asked. I turned from the laptop, catching the reflection of my own face in the dark screen. "Some people," I said gently, "get uncomfortable when someone else stands out." Livia tilted her head. "But isn't that what makes people interesting?" I smiled at her, reaching out to tuck a curl behind her ear. "Yes, baby, it is." She watched as I opened the drawer and took out a tube of deep burgundy lipstick. I twisted the cap, looked at it, thought about it, then slowly returned it to its place and closed the drawer. Her face dropped a little, but she didn't press. She was learning, like I had, what we're supposed to pretend not to see. After she left, I sat there alone for a while. If she wanted quiet, I'd give her silence so complete, it might echo. The drive to the rehearsal dinner was quiet. Livia dozed off in the back seat, her head tilted against the window, lips slightly parted. I let the radio hum low, some soft rock station that felt like background music in a waiting room. We pulled up just past 6. The sun hadn't set yet, but the sky had started to lose its color, like someone had turned down the saturation. I parked far from the entrance, less out of necessity, more out of instinct. Inside, the event hall buzzed with polite laughter, polished shoes clicking against marble tile, and that unmistakable perfume of expensive food and too many expectations. "We're here for the bride's family," I told the host at the front desk. He squinted at his clipboard. "And your name?" I gave it. He scanned the list, frowned. Here. Livia Lott, +1. I blinked. "She's 10. He didn't look up. "Still says +1. He handed me a card with our table number and gestured toward the far side of the room. Livia slipped her hand into mine, and we walked past glowing centerpieces and tables lined with smiling cousins, co-workers, and carefully selected acquaintances. Every table had its own little chandelier above it, except ours. We were seated near the double doors that led to the kitchen. Every few minutes, a waiter would push through carrying trays or clearing glasses. We were right by the trash return station. Verna walked by at one point, adjusting the flower arrangement on a nearby table. Her eyes met mine for less than a second. "You're fine here," she murmured, not stopping. No hello, no comment about the seating, just a nod that I had been seen and placed, exactly where she intended. I helped Livia into her seat, pulled my own chair out, and looked around. We were the only table without a breadbasket. The air felt cooler here. Or maybe that was just me. Livia leaned in close. Is it because we're late? I smiled, soft and tired. No, baby. It's because we were early in all the wrong ways. She tilted her head. That doesn't make sense. Not everything does. She played with her napkin. A few moments later, a waiter came by and handed me a glass of water, without asking. It was one of the staff glasses, I realized. No lemon, no ice. The kind they passed to the folks working the floor. I held it for a beat, then set it aside. A woman at a table like this doesn't ruin anything. She absorbs the ruin so the room stays clean. That's what I'd learned over the years. When someone needs to be ignored to make everyone else comfortable, they pick the one who doesn't fight back. Our table didn't have a nameplate. The other tables had bridesmaids, groom's family, friends from college. Ours just had a number. 12. One of the catering staff bumped my chair on the way out with a tray of empty flutes. He apologized quickly, but didn't meet my eyes. It wasn't malice. It was muscle memory. You don't look directly at the help unless something goes wrong. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored panel across the room. Blurry, cropped by the edge of a centerpiece, and somehow still too visible. I used to think staying quiet meant I belonged, I thought, folding my napkin neatly in my lap. Tonight, I realized it just kept me in the room. And yet, I stayed seated until I couldn't. The lights dimmed before dessert. Someone tapped a glass, and a voice announced from the mic, "We'd like to share a little memory lane." Piano trickled softly from the speakers. Then came the photos. One by one, on a big screen near the bar. Polished images stitched together in a slideshow that screamed of good intentions. Christmas mornings. Darlene in a Santa hat, holding a new Barbie. Pool days, her splashing, grinning, surrounded by cousins. Birthday candles, glowing on a perfectly frosted cake. People clapped, smiled, murmured, "Oh, I remember that," and leaned closer to get a better look. I sat back. My water glass left a damp ring on the linen. The images kept rolling. One birthday shot made me lean forward. I remembered that day. I'd worn a red sweater. I stood at the end of the row, far left, but in the version on the screen, the frame stopped one person short of me. It was cropped. I stared, hoping maybe the next one would show me. Maybe that was just a one-off. But they kept coming, and I wasn't in a single frame. Not in the trip to Disneyland, where I'd pushed the stroller half the time. Not at the Thanksgiving, where I'd baked both pies while Verna complained about my crust being too rustic. Not at the cousin's wedding, where I helped manage the flower girls. Darlene, Darlene, Darlene. Always centered, well-lit, and smiling like she'd invented every happy moment. I took a sip from my water glass and let it sit on my tongue. My hands stayed folded in my lap. If they erase you enough times, even your own memories start to feel like lies. Later, I slipped into the back lounge near the restrooms. I needed a moment, somewhere off the main floor. The overhead light buzzed faintly, a constant reminder that even in silence, something hums. Livia found me sitting on the love seat, still in my shoes. She hesitated at the door. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She padded over, her dress slightly wrinkled from sitting too long at table 12. "I made something for Grandma," she said, and held out a piece of folded paper. It was crumpled, soft around the edges, like it had been handled then discarded. I opened it gently. A sun in the top left corner. A stick figure woman with long hair. The words, "I love you, Grandma. Thank you for the party." I looked up. "This is lovely." "I left it on the table before dinner," Livia whispered. She must not have seen it. But her tone told me she knew. She'd seen it too. In the trash. She just didn't want to say it. "She didn't even read it," she added after a moment, twisting her fingers together. I folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into my clutch. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it more than I could explain. We sat there for a while in the hum of fluorescent lighting and muffled music from the reception room. When I stepped out of the lounge later, Verna was in the hallway, pretending to check her phone. I walked past her but paused just long enough to speak. Did Livia's note not match the color palette too? She looked up, cool as glass. Let's not make things dramatic, Noreen. Of course, I said softly. Wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic. I didn't wait for her response. There wasn't one coming anyway. As I walked back toward the reception, the hallway narrowed around me. Not physically, but in the way only silence can do when it's held too long. You don't have to scream to disappear. You just have to be ignored long enough. And if being forgotten was the punishment, maybe remembering would be the revenge. I re-entered the ballroom with a forced calm, clutching my glass tighter than necessary. The crowd had shifted. Dessert plates were being cleared. People milling near the bar. Soft jazz humming from the speakers. The lights had dimmed slightly, giving the whole place a haze that felt more like a filter than an atmosphere. I passed the mirrored columns, keeping to the edge of the crowd, not looking for anyone, but not trying to disappear either. Just looking. Somewhere between the centerpieces and the dance floor, I slowed. A pair of guests stood near the champagne table. Well-dressed, early 40s maybe. Not family, but familiar in that way people from the groom's side often were. One wore a crimson cocktail dress, the other adjusted his cufflinks as he spoke. "That's the sister, right?" the man said under his breath, glancing discreetly in my direction. The woman responded, not whispering nearly enough. "Mm-hmm. You know, she had the kid with that guy. Never married. It's a lot. They invited her so she wouldn't freak out." He chuckled. "Classy." My feet stopped behind a column. I could see their reflections in the glass, not 5 feet away. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. My fingers curled around the stem of my glass. I didn't even know I was famous enough to have a narrative. Eventually, I turned away and made my way toward the bar. A bridesmaid I vaguely recognized, one of Darlene's work friends, the kind that only showed up for photo ops, stood nearby, phone to her ear. "I'm just saying," she murmured. "Darlene told me she only kept her around because she covered the flower deposit. Like, she's not family, more like a helpful resource." She laughed softly. "Yeah, the quiet ones always pay up first." I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I picked up a club soda from the bar and walked outside without a word. You can carry a wedding on your back, but it won't get you a seat at the table. Not if the story they prefer is one where you were just passing through. A footnote. Outside, the cool air snapped against my face like a fresh towel. I found an empty bench tucked under a string of soft white lights, the kind meant to make everything feel whimsical. The kind that look pretty in photos but don't give off any real warmth. I sat, drank slowly, and let my mind spin. You can work the lights, but they'll still hand the mic to someone else. You can hold the weight, and they'll still call you excess. I was too familiar with that script. It was stitched into my hemline, into the tone of my mother's voice, into the gaps in every family photo I wasn't in. I don't know how long I sat there before Harlan found me. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I looked at him, measuring. "Your side of the room talks quieter." He sat down beside me, hands in his lap. "But still loud enough, huh?" I nodded. Loud enough to make sure I know what I'm not. He said nothing for a moment, then just, "I see more than you think." That surprised me. Not what he said, but that he said it at all. He looked like he wanted to add something else, but didn't. Instead, he leaned back, watching the string lights above us sway gently in the breeze. We sat there in that silence, his calm, mine loaded, and neither of us broke it. For once, someone stayed beside me without needing me to say anything. Maybe that was enough. For now. If they wanted to write me out of the story, they should have stopped giving me pens. Because now, I was starting to write things down. Back at the hotel, the air conditioner buzzed louder than usual. I had taken off my heels and lined them neatly by the wall, like some small act of control. Livia sat cross-legged on the bed, her hair damp from a quick shower, flipping through a picture book she barely looked at. "Mom?" she said quietly. I turned from the mirror, where I was wiping off the last of my eyeliner. "Yeah, honey?" She hesitated, her voice small but clear. "Are we actually family to them?" My hand paused mid-wipe. It wasn't the question that shook me. It was how calmly she said it, like she had been thinking about it for a while, building up to it. I sat on the edge of the bed beside her. Silence stretched between us for a beat too long. Earlier that day, I'd watched her try to be seen. At the photo call for the kids of the family, she stood near the cluster of cousins until one of the planners, clipboard in hand, pointed to her and said, "Wait, whose daughter is that?" I had to speak up from across the room. "Mine." No one moved to include her. The photographer smiled awkwardly and took the photo anyway, without her. Later, while waiting for cake, I noticed Livia's plate remained empty, while those around her got served first. Twice I asked the server before they finally slid a slice onto her plate like it was a favor, not a given. She didn't complain, just sat quietly, legs swinging under the table, the fork untouched. At one point, she walked over to Darlene to say hi. Darlene glanced down at her, offered a polite smile, and turned to talk to someone else before Livia finished her sentence. Now, sitting next to me in a room that wasn't quite ours, she asked the question I'd spent most of my adult life trying not to ask out loud. "Are we really part of this family, Mom? Because it doesn't feel like it." I folded a pair of her socks and laid them on the dresser, trying to buy a moment before answering. Then I sat back down and faced her. "Listen," I said, "we're real, you and me. We love each other. We care. We show up." She watched me carefully. "That makes us family, even when blood doesn't act like it." She nodded once, solemn and still. Not the nod of understanding, just acceptance. And that broke me more than if she'd cried. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached for my notebook, the one I used to track wedding vendor contacts and invoice receipts, and turned to the last blank page. I wrote one sentence across the top in bold black ink. "If they could disown us without paperwork, I can leave without apology." I didn't know what that meant yet. Not really. But it felt like a beginning. Across the room, Livia climbed under the covers. Her small body curled toward the wall, leaving a space beside her that reminded me just how much of this she'd already learned to carry. I turned off the bedside lamp. And maybe, I thought, just maybe I was done earning my last name. And that night, something shifted in him too. Not just toward me, but away from her. By the time speeches began, the lights were dimmed just enough to make people feel softened, flattered in their shadows. The servers had cleared the dinner plates, replaced them with champagne flutes that sat waiting, untouched. I knew what came next. I'd helped organize this schedule myself. Darlene stood at the center of the room in a silk gown that probably cost more than my car. Her hair, curled and set into perfection, never moved. Her smile was camera-ready, even as her voice took on that tone she always used when she wanted to sound gracious and above it all, like royalty humoring the peasants. "I just want to take a moment to thank my sister," she said, her eyes finding me across the room, her tone as sweet as syrup gone sour. A few people turned toward me. Some clapped. Most just followed the cue, unsure if they were clapping for something I did or just because it was time to clap. "Raising a child alone," she continued, pausing for just a beat too long, "takes courage. So brave. So brave to never settle down, never build anything stable, yet keep going." There were chuckles, polite, uncertain. She smiled wider. She taught me resilience, how to keep smiling even when you don't quite belong. Verna beamed like Darlene had just cured cancer. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I'd learned how to sit still when it mattered. The room didn't erupt. It paused. It swayed, the way people do when a wave catches them mid-step. The mic passed on to the next speaker, but Darlene had done what she came to do. The insult, perfectly framed as a compliment, now sat like a flower arrangement at the center of every table. Pretty, poisonous, and intentional. I raised my glass. "Thank you, Darlene," I said loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I guess some of us build quietly. Some of us survive storms instead of throwing parades." Silence. Then a few murmurs. Not laughter. Just that odd space people fill when they know a line has been crossed, but aren't sure who was holding the chalk. Verna's smile faltered, and I sat back in my seat, taking a sip, letting the weight settle in. Sometimes, not clapping back is the real performance. Later, I was refilling Livia's cup at the buffet when Harlan found me near the salad trays. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that made him look less like a groom and more like someone watching a slow unravel. "That was," he said, pausing. "That was something." I didn't look up. Was it brave of me to stand there and not throw salad tongs? He gave a short laugh, real, low. "I think brave was the word," he said, his voice gentler now. "Just not the way she meant it." I met his eyes. For once, I didn't feel like I had to lower mine first. There was something in his gaze, not pity, not surprise. Recognition. That's what it was. Recognition has a weight of its own. They wanted me small, I thought. But small things can grow roots. And I was done staying rootless. The room emptied in slow waves after the speeches. Clusters of guests lingered by the dessert bar, making small talk over half-eaten cake. The music softened into something jazzy and harmless. Harlan drifted back into the crowd, and I made my way to Livia, who had curled up in the corner of our table with a napkin folded like origami. "I'm tired," she said, her voice muffled behind her hand. "I know," I said, brushing a curl from her forehead. "It'll be over soon." We were waiting for the family photo. Darlene's assistant walked around the room, clipboard in hand, calling out groupings like she was running a theater production. "Bride's parents, groom's parents, siblings and nieces, please." Verna passed our table. "We'll do one with everyone after," she said over her shoulder. "Just sit tight." So we did. Tight as we could. Eventually, the main photo wrapped up, and the crowd dispersed slightly. I stood up, gently guiding Livia by the hand toward the center. The assistant blinked at me. "Oh, we're done with family shots." I kept my tone calm. "We're family." She hesitated, then glanced at Verna, who stood 10 feet away, busy laughing with a distant cousin. Verna turned slowly, then said without blinking, "We've already got enough for the album." I froze. Livia's fingers slipped from mine. I didn't argue. I nodded once, led her back to our seats, and said nothing. When we returned, my place setting was gone. A small card on the linen read, "Reserved, vendor overflow." A waiter leaned over. "I believe you've been reassigned to table 16, ma'am." "Why?" He shrugged politely. "Just a seating adjustment." Table 16 was near the swinging kitchen door, next to the coffee station. I found Livia's juice cup still there at table 12, untouched. She looked at me, confused. "Are we leaving?" "No," I said. "We've just been relocated." We sat quietly. The clatter of dishes behind us grew louder, with every refill, every tray. Later, Verna approached with a glass of white wine, and that careful smile she always wore when preparing to lie through her teeth. "You've always been dependable, Noreen," she said. "Never needed much attention, never asked for anything." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. She sipped her wine. "That's what makes you usable." I didn't move. She leaned in slightly. "Still, used is still used, right?" The words floated in the air like perfume gone sour. Livia flinched. I felt her little hand find mine under the table. I stood up slowly, keeping my grip on Livia's fingers. I didn't throw a drink, didn't raise my voice. I simply looked Verna in the eye and said, "Don't talk about me like I'm furniture." Her smile didn't budge. I walked Livia toward the exit. We passed table after table of people pretending not to notice, pretending they hadn't heard. Harlan stood in the corner. Our eyes met, but I didn't stop. Out in the parking lot, the cold was a relief. I opened the back door for Livia. She climbed in silently, buckling herself in with the kind of practiced stillness I recognized too well. Once in the driver's seat, I took a breath and let it sit heavy in my lungs. I wasn't screaming, but somehow I was the loudest person in the room. And the next day, someone finally decided to ask the right questions. I didn't hear from Harlan after I left the reception. No texts, no calls. Just silence, which, coming from anyone else in that family, would have meant dismissal. But with him, it felt different. Intentional, like something was unfolding. The morning after, Livia and I stopped by a bakery on the way back to the hotel to grab something simple for breakfast. I sipped my coffee while she picked the raisins out of her muffin. I was trying not to think about any of it. About Verna's words, the empty chair at the family photo, the way nobody even blinked when we left. Meanwhile, Harlan sat at the groom's suite table with a stack of vendor invoices and a planner's folder, flipping through them with the half-aware rhythm of someone who'd been taught not to question the details until they no longer made sense. "Hey, you need to sign off on these," one of his groomsmen said, pushing the documents toward him. He nodded, barely looking, until he did. There it was. An invoice from the florist. $2,700 paid up front. The billing contact read, Noreen Lott. He furrowed his brow. Next tab, catering deposit. Cross-referenced the payment, Lott Financial Services. His thumb hovered above the total, tapping lightly. "Wait," he muttered. "She paid for this?" He flipped back through pages, then picked up his phone and dialed the wedding planner's assistant. "I just need clarification," he said, voice tight but calm. "Who paid the vendor deposits?" A pause. Then the voice on the other end answered cautiously. "We were asked not to discuss financial roles with anyone, specifically by the bride's mother." That was all he needed to hear. He hung up. I had watched her be quiet, be minimized, and I assumed it meant she had nothing to say, he thought, turning over the receipt again. And then, her words came back. Just a line, dropped like it meant nothing. "Some of us build quietly." Now it clicked. At brunch later that day, Darlene sat across from him wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, picking at a fruit cup. "Did Noreen pay for the venue flowers?" he asked flatly. She laughed, a dry, careless sound. "Technically, she offered. She's good at that sort of thing. Besides, she wanted to feel useful." He said nothing. "You didn't even mention her in your speech," he added, softer now, but not without weight. She blinked. "Harlan, you're being weird." He looked at her like he was seeing her under new lighting for the first time. "No," he said. "I'm just reading the fine print." He stood up before she could ask what that meant. There are moments in life when you feel a shift, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. And this was one of them. Harlan didn't throw accusations. He didn't raise his voice. But a door somewhere inside him had opened, and he wasn't closing it again. If truth had a currency, then her silence had been funding everything, and I wasn't about to let them keep the receipt. Brunch the next morning was set up in the conservatory at the venue, a room meant to feel light, airy, peaceful. Instead, it felt like the aftertaste of the night before. Too sweet, too stiff, full of people pretending it hadn't happened. The clink of utensils scraping against porcelain echoed off the glass walls. Darlene sat at the head table, holding court in a pastel dress that looked chosen to imply innocence. Verna was a few chairs down, sipping from a mimosa like she'd slept just fine. Livia reached for her orange juice, and I noticed too late that her elbow caught the base of the glass. It tipped, fast and final. The crash was louder than it needed to be. The juice splashed across the white cloth, crawling toward the centerpiece like it had a target. Before Livia could even mutter an apology, Verna's voice cut through the air like a slap. "Of course it had to be her." she snapped, loud and clear. Can't even sit still, just like her mother. I froze. Livia sat back in her chair, her hands in her lap. Her face went blank in the way kids do when they're trying to vanish. And then Darlene laughed. Guess we know where the coordination skipped a generation. That did it. I stood. My chair didn't screech. I didn't shove anything. I just rose. Enough, I said, steady and louder than I expected. You don't get to humiliate a 10-year-old because you're losing control of the story. The table next to us went silent. Forks froze mid-air. Verna's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare speak to me like that in front of guests. Oh, I think we're done pretending in front of guests, I replied. You stopped being my mother in private a long time ago. Don't act like you're still holding that title in public. Gasps. Whispers. A chair shifted somewhere behind me. Darlene's smile cracked. Verna didn't blink. Can we go? Livia whispered, tugging at my hand under the table. I looked down at her, nodded. Yes, baby, but we're not sneaking out this time. We walked slowly, past the long tables full of people, too polite to make eye contact. Past the champagne cart, past the room of people who had chosen silence every time it was convenient. Harlan stood at the far end, hands in his pockets. His eyes followed us, but he didn't say a word. We didn't need him to. Outside, the air was crisp. I didn't feel the cold. My spine was holding me upright for the first time in longer than I could remember. I wasn't just leaving brunch. I was leaving the version of me they kept trying to serve. I had just finished buckling Livia into her booster seat when I heard the brunch hall door open behind us. It creaked a little, wood on metal, an echo across the near-empty lot, and I turned my head out of habit more than curiosity. I was ready to leave, ready not to care who walked out next. But then I heard a voice. His voice. Harlan, low, steady, and, this time, undeniably clear. Before we all leave, he said. I froze beside the car, one hand still on the door handle. The cold didn't stop me. The words did. He let the moment breathe. And it did. Even from outside, I felt the stillness ripple through the room behind us. The rustle of napkins, the clink of forks, all of it suddenly suspended mid-motion. I think there's something that needs to be said. Properly this time. I could picture it all without looking. The precise moment forks were set down, backs straightened, eyebrows raised. Verna's eyes narrowing. Darlene adjusting her posture like a pageant contestant mid-audition. You all clapped for speeches, Harlan continued. That left out the person who made most of this possible. He didn't shout. He didn't need volume, just precision. The florist deposit, he said. Noreen. The catering retainer? A pause. Noreen. The calligraphy, the RSVP sorting, the seating chart, every detail you didn't notice, but complained about when it didn't magically appear. Another pause. Noreen. The silence now was heavier, thicker, like fog turning to stone. And do you know what was said about her behind closed doors? He asked, his tone sharper now, that she just wanted to be useful. I could practically hear the breath leave bodies inside, that soft, involuntary gasp people make when they realize the table isn't as steady as they thought. She was never here to feel useful, Harlan said. She was essential. You just didn't want to admit it, because if you did, you'd owe her more than thanks. You'd owe her truth. I didn't move, didn't glance back. I didn't need to. I stood beside my car in the chill air, one foot on the curb and the other still in the moment. Not my words, but for once, it was my truth being said aloud, and that mattered more than volume. Inside, I imagined Verna trying to recover the floor. She'd try to deflect, probably with some remark about timing or dignity or how things are done. But the air had already shifted. And then, as if on cue, Darlene's voice rang out, forced and brittle. This is our day, Harlan. He didn't even blink. Then why? He asked. Did she pay for it? The line cut clean, a perfect incision. I could almost feel the echo come through the glass. I imagined Verna's face turning, trying to reprocess years of etiquette and expectations. Looking at her daughter, realizing too late that she'd raised her to host, not to honor. A woman stood quietly and gathered her purse. No drama, just quiet refusal. Another leaned toward her husband and muttered something sharp, just loud enough. That was disgusting. The guests didn't stampede for the exits, but the illusion fell apart at the seams. You could feel it, the unraveling. The choreography slipped, shoulders slouched, smiles faltered. Conversations lost their polish and began to crumble into scattered, hushed exchanges. Back at the car, I opened the driver's door and climbed in. Livia watched me from the back seat, her eyes steady, thoughtful. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. The air around us felt different now, cleared, not empty, just clean. The silence that followed didn't hum with shame or hesitation. It sat with dignity, with earned presence. If a silence was worth 1,000 words, I found myself thinking, then what he said just bought me back everyone I lost. And I hadn't even said anything, not yet. But I would, soon. The morning air outside the venue had been brisk, but inside the banquet hall, it was stiff with leftover tension. We were halfway to the parking lot when the doors behind us creaked open again. I turned just enough to see the DJ jogging toward Harlan, a small flash drive in hand, and a whisper that must have carried more weight than it looked. Harlan didn't look back at me. He didn't motion for me to return. He just turned around and walked back into that room like someone who wasn't asking anymore, just delivering. Inside, guests were rising from their seats, grabbing handbags, straightening jackets. It was the unofficial end to the day, one last breath before dispersing and pretending to forget what they'd witnessed. But Harlan didn't let them forget. He stepped to the mic. "Before we close out this event," he said, calm but sharp, "I think there's something everyone here deserves to hear." People paused, chairs half pulled, phones halfway tucked into clutches. Even Verna's hand froze mid-reach for her glass. "Ms. Lott," the event host asked awkwardly, "would you like to say something?" Harlan beat me to it. "Actually," he said, "play this first." The DJ didn't hesitate. A click, a pause, and then static, then voices. It was unmistakably Darlene. I mean, it's not like she has a life. And then Verna. She pays, she stays quiet. That's her use. Laughter. Darlene again. Exactly. Let her pay for once. She owes us that much. There was a sound of clinking, silverware on ceramic, and a sharp inhale from somewhere in the room. No one moved. A wine glass met the table too hard and didn't break, but it made a noise that cut through the air like a slap. A woman near the buffet whispered, "This was recorded?" The DJ nodded without lifting his gaze. "Hot mic! It picked up backstage during the ceremony." Verna started to stand, maybe to explain, maybe to stop it, but Harlan raised a hand. "No," he said, "just that." And it was enough. I was still outside, standing under the overhang with Livia, watching the glass doors, watching the people inside start to shrink. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I walked back in. Not far, just far enough that they saw me, that they knew I was no longer outside that door waiting to be forgotten. I stepped forward when the room turned toward me. I didn't grab the mic. I didn't need it. I didn't ask for applause, I said, voice steady. I didn't ask for credit, but I damn sure didn't pay to be insulted. I looked straight at Verna. "You wanted quiet?" I added. "Then listen now, because this silence, this one, belongs to me." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't offer closure. I turned, nodded at Livia, and walked out once more. But this time, the crowd parted. They moved, not out of politeness, but because they didn't know how else to respond. Darlene didn't speak. Her face was pale, lips tight. Verna looked at her the way a woman looks at her own reflection and sees a crack running through it for the first time. Someone at the back of the room muttered, "They really said that about her?" Another woman with a gray clutch whispered to her husband, "Makes you wonder what else they've said." There were no gasps this time, no murmured excuses, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after you hear something you can't unhear. Sometimes, I thought, walking back toward the car, truth doesn't need backup dancers. It just needs a microphone. And for the first time in their lives, they had to hear me, uninterrupted. The truth doesn't knock, it crashes. And when it does, it doesn't ask permission or apologize for the mess it leaves behind. The music had ended over 20 minutes ago, yet the silence now lingering in the grand hall was far louder. A few stragglers remained, murmuring half-hearted goodbyes or pretending to check messages on their phones. Most people were just stalling, unsure whether to stay out of politeness or leave before being pulled into more awkward small talk. They hovered near exits and buffet tables, hoping not to be noticed. Harlan didn't hover. He didn't move at all. He stood alone in the farthest corner of the hall, back straight, hands at his sides. Still, his eyes were fixed on nothing in particular. Maybe the place on the wall where the projection screen had been rolled up. Maybe just the empty air. His jaw clenched now and then, like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. The audio from the flash drive still vibrated in his chest, like a phantom echo. He hadn't said a single word since I walked out with Livia. Hadn't reacted when the room fell into collective gasps and nervous whispers. When the truth played over those speakers, raw, unfiltered, he didn't recoil, didn't argue. He just listened. Every word, every pause, every unmasking breath. It played like a requiem for everything he thought he believed in. The ring box he'd kept tucked away in his inner pocket felt heavier now, not because of the thin gold band inside, but because of the weight it was never meant to carry. It had once symbolized a promise. Now it felt more like a lie he'd nearly believed in. As the crowd thinned and the artificial charm drained from the space, Darlene found him. Of course she did. If there was one thing she excelled at, it was locating opportunity amid chaos. She approached with the poise of someone rehearsed in damage control. Chin lifted, voice just low enough to sound urgent, but not frantic. Her heels clicked a sharp rhythm on the floor as she closed the distance. "We can fix this," she said, glancing side to side to make sure no one was watching too closely. Her smile was still intact, but only barely. People forget. These kinds of things, they blow over. He didn't answer right away. He just reached into his jacket, slowly, and pulled out the small black velvet box. For a moment, he stared at it in his palm, like seeing it for the first time with new eyes. Then he extended it toward her. She took a half step back, unsure. "There was never a we to fix," he said flatly. Her face twitched. The mask wobbled. "You're throwing away everything," she whispered, the desperation finally cracking through. "Everything we've worked for. We had a future." "No," Harlan said, his voice steady but quiet. "You had a performance. I was just the applause." Darlene opened her mouth, then shut it again. There wasn't a rebuttal sharp enough to dull that line. Her eyes searched his for some kind of opening, but found only the chill of detachment. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, recognition. She didn't lose him in that moment. She realized she never had him in the first place. He turned before she could say anything else. No dramatic farewell, just a pivot toward the exit. He walked past the wreckage of what was supposed to be a celebration. Half-drunk champagne flutes, crumpled napkins, drooping flower arrangements. Past the table where I once sat beside him, smiling for photos like a well-dressed accessory. The outside air hit different. The sun had begun its slow descent, turning the parking lot gold. The breeze felt honest, crisp and unscripted. I was standing near the car. Livia was in the back seat, legs swinging as she finished a juice box, oblivious to the grown-up drama swirling around her. He spotted me. "That recording wasn't meant for anyone else to hear," I said, not accusing, just stating. He shook his head slowly. "No, but they needed to." and I needed to. We stood there in silence, the kind that doesn't ask for answers or apologies. It was enough that we were both there, in the same air, without pretenses. Then he said, "You were the one with real vows, Noreen, even if no one ever handed you a ring." That hit harder than anything that came before, not because it was flattering, but because it was finally honest. Just then, Livia slid out of the car. She was clutching a folded napkin with something scrawled on it in crayon. She held it out to Harlan like it was something sacred. "I drew you something," she said shyly, "in case you want to join a better family." He took it gently, unfolding the paper. Inside was a slightly crooked drawing of a house with 3 stick figures and a lopsided dog. Over the roof, she'd written in big, careful letters, "You can live here." For the first time in what felt like years, Harlan smiled. Not wide, not performative, but real. Small. Earnest. He looked at Livia, then at me. "I'll think about it," he said. Livia beamed, satisfied, and ran back to the car. I stayed behind a few seconds longer. He hadn't walked out for me. He hadn't even walked out because of the scandal. He walked out for himself, for the version of him that had been buried under expectation, image, and applause. And that's how I knew he might finally be someone worth walking beside. In the end, we all left with less. Some lost dignity, some lost illusions, some lost the roles they'd rehearsed for years. But somehow, strangely, unexpectedly, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. Not really. 2 days passed. The silence wasn't unfamiliar, but this time, it didn't feel like neglect. It felt like strategy, like everyone had slipped into a quiet room to rewrite the narrative without me present. That morning, I checked my phone out of muscle memory, not hope. The screen lit up. Nothing from Verna, nothing from Darlene. No guilt-laced emojis, no faux concerned follow-ups. Not even a heart emoji from one of my cousins, who used to like my cake photos out of some sense of familial duty. Just one new message. An email. It was from a florist I'd collaborated with several months ago for an engagement party that never happened. The subject line read, "Apologies again." I opened it. "Sorry again for the confusion about who placed the order. I should have double-checked and made sure your name was listed on the delivery slip." I replied automatically, "No worries, thanks again." It was a small thing, hardly worth remembering. But somehow it unraveled me, like the last thread holding together a carefully stitched costume, a simple email, an apology long overdue, a name that should have been acknowledged, but wasn't. That small oversight had once annoyed me. Now it just felt like an omen I hadn't understood at the time. Later that afternoon, I was folding Livia's laundry, tiny socks with cartoon cats, a t-shirt she insisted on wearing inside out, a pair of jeans with glitter glue stains that had survived 3 washes. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I tapped it absently while smoothing out a hoodie. I tried to open the family group chat, the one that had been around longer than the name group chat existed. It had been renamed at least 3 times over the years, but the energy never changed, always too loud, always filtered through passive judgment. This time, when I tapped the thread, the screen flashed. Access denied. I blinked. Tried again. Same message. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe an app issue, or maybe I had accidentally muted or archived it. Then a message came through. Not from Verna, not from Darlene. From my cousin Danny. "Hey, just a heads up. They removed you from the chat. Said it's gotten too toxic. Grandma thinks you embarrassed her." I stared at the screen until the words lost their shape. Toxic. That's the word they used. Not honest, not painful, not necessary, just toxic. I didn't respond. I locked my phone, flipped its screen down, and picked up another sock. That evening, I had a client meeting at the coffee shop near the courthouse, a bookkeeping consultation. My brain appreciated the numbers. They didn't flinch, didn't twist themselves into gossip. They just lined up or they didn't. While I waited for my coffee, I heard my name softly spoken. I turned. A woman I knew from my old church, someone who used to nod politely during service but never said much, stood beside me. "I always thought you were just quiet," she said. Her voice wasn't unkind, more like surprised. "Turns out you're brave?" I smiled, not out of politeness, not to deflect, but because, for once, it felt earned. "No," I said. "I just stopped asking for a mic." She blinked, absorbing that, then nodded once, as if it made perfect sense. The next day, I ran into another client, an old neighbor who only ever called when tax season came around. She was casual, holding a Togo cup and walking her dog. "I heard things got a little emotional at the wedding," she said, almost conspiratorially. "Your mom told me you were just overwhelmed." I tilted my head. "She's right," I said. The woman raised an eyebrow, curious, judgmental, both. "I was overwhelmed," I repeated, "by the sound of people pretending not to hear anything worth listening to." She didn't reply, just sipped her drink and looked off into the distance, like something better might be happening behind me. Later that evening, when we got home, Livia tossed her shoes into the corner, kicked off one sock, and padded down the hallway. From the hallway, her voice came small but clear. "Are we going to Grandma's for Thanksgiving?" I paused. No flinch, no reflexive lie. I walked to her, knelt beside her little frame, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "No, baby," I said softly. "Not this year. This year, we're going to start something new. Just us. Somewhere we're heard, not just invited." She nodded with the calm certainty only a child can have, like it already made perfect sense. Maybe, at her age, it really did. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the couch with my phone in my hand. I opened the Notes app. For weeks, I'd carried a line in my head, one that had nowhere to go. Until now. I typed, "They can keep their microphones. I've got something louder now, my own voice, in my daughter's story." I read it twice. Then I hit save. And sometimes the softest exits leave the deepest echo. A year later, the floor still creaked in the same spots in our apartment. The window in the kitchen still stuck every time it rained. The coffee maker still gurgled at 6:15, even on weekends. But something in the silence had changed. It no longer felt like something was missing. It just felt still. I had opened a small accounting office downtown. Nothing flashy, just a brick storefront with clean blinds and a wooden sign that read, "Monroe Financial Services." Livia had drawn the logo, and I hadn't changed a thing. Clients came slowly at first, then steadily. A widow starting over. A single dad trying to track down old child support. A teacher who hated numbers but loved her classroom enough to keep going. And they came because I didn't just do math. I listened. That morning, I was finishing up a return for a woman named Kayla, single mom, 2 kids, late on everything but determined. She looked at the crayon drawing taped behind my desk. "That's adorable," she said. "Your daughter?" I nodded. She hesitated, then added, "You're the one from that wedding, right?" I smiled. "I'm the one who left early." We laughed, and that was the end of it. No further explanation needed. When I got home that afternoon, the mailbox held a padded envelope. No return address. I opened it carefully, expecting a flyer, or maybe something from a vendor I forgot to unsubscribe from. Inside was a photo. It was of a soccer game. Livia, mid-kick, her ponytail flying. I hadn't seen the photo before. On the back, in handwriting, I didn't recognize it first. It said, "For the woman who saved a wedding by walking out of it, and for the girl who reminded me what bravery really looks like." H. There was no note, no invitation, no expectations, just witnessing. Livia found me in the kitchen a few minutes later, the photo in my hand. "He didn't forget," she said softly, like it was something she had been wondering about. "No," I said, brushing her bangs from her eyes. "He saw." We taped the photo on the fridge. Not front and center, but beside a grocery list and the flyer for next week's school fundraiser. That night, after dinner, I locked up the office and walked through the quiet neighborhood to our building. The air was just starting to hold the promise of spring. Tulips had pushed through in the window boxes, stubborn and soft at the same time. Inside, I straightened the clipboard on my desk, then pinned up a new drawing from Livia. 3 stick figures again. This one had glasses on the tallest figure. Harlan, maybe. Or maybe not. I didn't ask. On the calendar behind me, a reminder blinked. Parent-teacher night. Thursday, 6 p.m. I smiled and shut off the lamp. For so long, I thought my voice had to be loud to matter. Now I know. It just had to be true. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was about remembering who I've always been and letting the world hear it, finally.